We've got breaking news out of the NFL where the Washington Commanders have signed wide receiver Terry McLaurin to a 3-year extension worth $71 million. That's according to ESPN. McLaurin has led the Commanders in receiving yards in each of his first 3 seasons in Washington. His new AAV of $23.7 million is the 7th highest among NFL wide receivers, sandwiched between Cooper Kupp and DJ Moore in terms of the contracts. The AAV puts him between Stephon Diggs and DJ Moore. And for more on this, let's now bring in our fantasy analyst, Dave Richard. Dave, first your reaction to McLaurin. Now the summer, I shouldn't say the summer, the off season of the wide receiver continues.
Spring and summer of the off of the wide receiver continues. And look, it's great that Terry McLaurin is getting paid. You really have to look at the film to say that he deserves it because the numbers don't quite say how good of a wide receiver he is. And we'll get into that. But he's easily the best wide receiver in Washington. You can make the argument he's the best playmaker on offense. This was a great pick by the Commanders back a few years ago. And they're hanging on to him. There was a point where there was talk that they might not hang on to him and that they might move on and not pay him. They've realized that receivers are getting these big deals. They want to get in on it. They need to have that number one guy. This dude's it.
2 straight 1,000-yard seasons for him. When you look at, I don't know if it changes much for the Commanders because he was going to be there, but I mean, what kind of stability does it provide at the position that he's now locked in?
I mean, look, he's going to be their playmaker, their number one guy. Fantasy managers are excited about that. They've got a new quarterback in Carson Wentz. I don't know if that's so good for his fantasy value because we've seen Carson Wentz play poorly, and wide receivers have not really done that great. The best wide receiver finish by a guy catching passes from Carson Wentz was 23rd in PPR points per game. 23rd, Jeremy. That means he's not even a top 20 receiver. Is McLaurin better than Alshon Jeffrey was a few years ago? I kind of want to say yes to that question. Can he make Carson Wentz a better quarterback? I'm not so sure. But I think fantasy managers will look at Terry McLaurin as one of the safer bounce-back wide receivers and the catalyst of this Washington offense. I think he's going to be worth taking right in that late round 4, early round 5 range.
Wow.
As somebody who can be a number 2 receiver for your fantasy team. He might not finish much higher than 23rd in PPR points per game by the time this season ends, but I do think he's got a chance to be solid for you. He's got a 19% explosive play rate. That was last year. That's pretty good. He had 11 end zone targets, caught a touchdown in 4 of them. That's pretty good. I especially like that 11 number. I think that's going to continue to be big for McLaurin. As long as he's healthy, he stays on the field, he should be at least a top 30 wide receiver. The ceiling is top 12. I don't think he gets there, but between 15 and 25, somewhere in there, that's where I think you get him. I'm doing a choppy thing here.
And you saw him sitting there at 16 in terms of the ranking. So, I mean, right in that window. What does this do for other fantasy targets on the Commanders?
Well, the other Commander receiver that people are starting to get excited about is Jahan Dotson. He's their rookie, their first-round pick, and I almost think that he was kind of like an insurance policy in case they couldn't work anything out with Terry McLaurin, but he's a good receiver, too. This is a late-round choice that I'm excited about. We had to talk about him on our podcast today. He's one of a handful of wide receivers that you're going to take in round 10 or later, and they've got some pretty serious upside, and he does give Carson Wentz another weapon both in the short and intermediate areas and down the field. And all the reports out of Washington say that Dotson's been really on the same page with Carson Wentz. He's a playmaker too. I know it's crazy, but these receivers might help Carson Wentz have better numbers. And I think fantasy managers in Superflex and 2 QB leagues, they've got to remember Wentz's name once those first 15 to 20 quarterbacks are off the board. Dotson's a good late round pick.
Okay, so McLaurin sitting there round 4, round 5 is kind of what you're saying. Wide receiver 2 numbers is kind of what you're expecting.
That's what I'm expecting. Yep.
Okay, so for the running game, let's talk about the running game for this team. I mean, obviously, you know, it's we've got Wentz in there. Antonio Gibson is, you know, one of the guys that you're looking at. So when you look at overall this team with the securing of McLaurin, I mean, are you confident in Washington at 7.5 wins is kind of what the target is this year?
No, not very confident in them in 7.5 wins. And some of it has to do with the fact that they're in a division that I think is going to get tougher. I think Dallas is going to be better. I think the Giants are going to be better. And obviously Philadelphia, they won the division last year. I think they go right back and win the division again this year. So I have a hard time believing that just in the division they're the best team. And if they're not first or second in the division. It's a hard time imagining them getting to that 8 or 9 win mark. I would take the under on that. And I would also be a little bit nervous about Antonio Gibson because he's seen J.D. McKissic come back.
Yes.
Brian Robinson got drafted. Robinson he's kind of a do-it-all running back, but they really like his physical ability, and he's going to take some work off of Antonio Gibson. The nice thing for the run game is that you're going to have McLaurin on one side, Dotson on the other. Eventually, defenses are going to realize they can't crowd the box against this Commanders offense. They can't do it enough against Carson Wentz. But I don't know if Gibson's going to get enough work game to game to really pay that off. He's going to be a number 2 fantasy running back too.
And again, questions about Wentz as well. We'll wait and see what happens with Wentz. But when you look at this offseason of the wide receiver, I mean, do you expect it to keep going, or is this have we hit the ceiling?
This is the trend in the NFL right now. Teams don't want to let go of their number 1 wide receivers, the playmakers down the field. It's becoming more and more a passing league. The stats year over year show that teams are willing to throw it more. It's not necessarily throwing it 15 yards downfield, Jeremy. They're fine with tunnel screens and short passes, slants, this and that, things that Terry McLaurin has done plenty of himself. I think you just look at the direction that the NFL is going in. Teams want to go in that direction. They want to hang on to their stud wide receivers. That's what Washington's doing. Smart move.
CBS Sports HQ fantasy expert Dave Richard chiming in on the signing of Terry McLaurin, a 3-year deal worth $71 million with the Washington Commanders. Good to see you, Dave.
Yep.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I appreciate that. And of course, for more on this topic, Dave mentioned they were talking a little bit about Washington today. Check out the podcast Fantasy Football Today. You can download and follow wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can also watch the program on YouTube.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.